There are stories buried deep in history that most people dare not speak of, legends whispered only in the dead of night, when shadows creep along the walls and silence presses heavy against the air. These tales are not just ghost stories. They are fragments of real events, moments where history and horror intertwine so tightly that it becomes impossible to separate truth from nightmare. One such story comes from a quiet English village where the graves of an entire family, once thought to be resting peacefully, were found empty. What happened to them? Why were their remains missing? And what dark truth lingers behind their disappearance? The Vexley family's sudden and mysterious deaths in the 19th century left behind chilling rumors, the kind of whispers that never fully fade with time, but instead burrow into the folklore of a place, growing darker with every retelling. They were not an ordinary family, or at least that is what the villagers often said. The Vexleys had wealth, a sprawling estate on the edge of the village, and a reputation for keeping to themselves. While others mingled at markets or festivals, the Vexleys remained isolated, appearing only when necessity demanded. Their manor loomed over the countryside, its tall windows casting reflections like watchful eyes, its halls said to echo with noises no servant could ever explain. The family's aloofness only fueled suspicion, and soon enough rumors began to spread that something unnatural lurked within the walls of their home. Some said it was a curse passed down through generations. Others whispered of strange practices performed in the dead of night, rituals that stained the very ground upon which their estate was built. What makes their fate even more terrifying is how swiftly and inexplicably it unfolded. Accounts vary, but most agree that one bitter winter in the mid-1800s, the entire Vexley household was struck by calamity. Some claimed an illness swept through the manor, claiming lives in rapid succession. Others believed they were murdered, though no culprit was ever named. And then there were those who insisted that the family brought their doom upon themselves, that their forays into forbidden knowledge had finally demanded a price. By the time villagers dared approach the estate, the house was silent, its windows dark, and inside lay the still bodies of the Vexleys, every one of them lifeless. No clear cause was ever determined. No physician could make sense of what had occurred. And in the absence of answers, speculation only deepened the shadows surrounding their name. Their burial should have been the end of the story. The villagers laid them to rest together in the local churchyard, sealing the chapter on the Vexleys with stone and soil. But even in death they did not find peace. People reported unease when passing their graves, a heaviness in the air as though the earth itself was reluctant to hold them. Children dared each other to step too close, swearing they could hear faint knocking from beneath the ground. Dogs avoided the burial site, pulling on their leashes with whimpers, and elders warned that nothing good could come from disturbing the Vexleys' resting place. The rumors surrounding their deaths became a tale told by candlelight, a cautionary story parents used to quiet children, yet the undercurrent of fear remained real. The manner of their demise was too sudden, too unexplainable, and that made the story linger. Villagers would recount how no priest seemed comfortable blessing the graves, how the burial service itself was strangely rushed, as if everyone present was eager to be finished and leave before the sun fell. Some swore they saw figures watching from the tree line, pale outlines that vanished when approached. All of this only fed the growing belief that the Vexleys had not truly gone to rest but were trapped in some state between worlds, their fate unfinished, their story incomplete. Generations passed, but the story of the Vexley family was never forgotten. When children grew into adults, they would recall how their parents had spoken of the cursed manor, the inexplicable deaths, and the uneasy graves. The house itself decayed, its roof collapsing in storms, its windows shattering into black holes staring outward at the village. Yet even as the estate fell to ruin, no one dared rebuild upon the land. It was as if the soil itself had been marked, permanently stained by what had taken place. The graves remained the only tangible reminder, a row of stone markers with names etched into them, each one a silent testament to a family whose life ended in fear and whose death bred more questions than answers. The most unsettling detail about the Vexleys' demise, the one that carried through every retelling, was how complete it had been. No other family line was so thoroughly extinguished. Servants, relatives, even distant cousins tied to the household seemed to vanish or sever themselves from the name entirely. It was as if the family had been erased, scrubbed from existence with only whispers and gravestones left behind. For many in the village, this made the mystery more than just tragedy. It became a warning. Those who sought too much knowledge, who isolated themselves from the living, who dabbled in what was forbidden, would eventually pay a price that erased them entirely. And so, the legend of the Vexleys endured, their sudden and mysterious deaths ensuring they would never be truly forgotten, even when time moved forward and the rest of the world changed. What had caused their demise was debated endlessly. Was it illness, violence, or something darker that human minds struggled to comprehend? The truth remained locked in the silence of their graves, a silence that pressed heavily on anyone who dared linger too long among the headstones, listening to the quiet of the earth, wondering if perhaps it was not quiet at all. In 1972, nearly a century after the Vexleys were first buried, the quiet village that had long lived in the shadow of their memory was shaken to its core when the graves of the entire family were opened and found empty. What should have been nothing more than a routine inspection of the aging churchyard turned into one of the most disturbing discoveries in modern local history. The burial ground, overgrown and largely neglected by then, had been scheduled for minor restoration as crumbling headstones and leaning markers had made the site unsafe for visitors. Workers approached the Vexley plot with the same indifference as any other row of graves, expecting only to reinforce the ground and repair the weathered stones. But when the earth was broken and the coffins reached, what they uncovered chilled them to the bone. Each coffin, once thought to contain the remains of the Vexley family, was entirely vacant. Not a bone, not a scrap of clothing, not even dust remained. It was as though the bodies had been erased from existence. The first reaction from the authorities was disbelief, followed by unease. Graves often decayed, coffins rotted, and bones became fragile, but to find complete emptiness, devoid of even the faintest trace of human remains, was beyond natural explanation. Some suggested grave robbers, pointing to the surge in occult fascination during the 1960s and 70s, where relics of the dead were sometimes stolen for ritualistic purposes. Yet even this theory faltered under scrutiny. To remove every body so thoroughly without disturbance to the soil above, or signs of forced entry into the coffins, would have required not only great effort but also a precision that bordered on impossible. The graves themselves appeared untouched, their surfaces undisturbed by human interference. To the workers who first uncovered the emptiness, it felt less like theft and more like something had drawn the Vexleys out from below in silence. News of the discovery spread quickly, and with it came a renewed flood of rumors. Old villagers, who still remembered stories of the Vexley curse, claimed it was proof that the family had never truly rested. Some whispered that the ground had rejected them, spitting out their remains as unworthy to remain buried. Others went further, saying the family had been claimed by forces darker than the earth itself, their souls dragged into places where no prayer could reach. The fear that once lingered only in legend now had a tangible anchor, and people began avoiding the cemetery altogether. Priests refused to bless the site again, claiming there was nothing left to sanctify, while children were warned never to go near the hollow graves. The mystery of the vanished remains invited investigation, yet no definitive answers ever emerged. Forensic experts were baffled. Even in cases of advanced decomposition, there should have been residue, fragments of bone, soil discoloration, remnants of clothing or coffin lining, but here there was nothing, as though the coffins had always been empty. Some officials quietly suggested the records might have been falsified, that perhaps the family had never been buried there at all. But this contradicted the memories of those who had attended the funeral decades earlier, who had watched the coffins lowered into the ground with their own eyes. To suggest otherwise was to suggest the entire village had participated in a lie, and that possibility was too disturbing to confront directly. Folklore quickly entwined itself with fact, making the boundary between them nearly impossible to separate. One tale that spread claimed that on the night before the discovery, locals passing near the cemetery reported strange lights glowing faintly among the graves as though lanterns were bobbing through the mist. Yet no one was there when checked. Another rumor told of muffled voices carried on the wind, whispers too low to understand, as if the earth itself were murmuring secrets before the truth was revealed. Whether these accounts were real or simply born of fear after the discovery is impossible to know, but they became inseparable from the story, lending it an atmosphere of dread that no official report could dispel. Even stranger was the physical condition of the coffins themselves. They were intact, neither smashed nor broken apart, their lids still sealed before they were pried open by workers. There were no gnaw marks from rodents, no signs of collapse that might explain the absence of remains. It was as if the coffins had been filled with bodies, only to be silently emptied, leaving behind nothing but hollow shells of wood slowly rotting in the ground. Witnesses described a suffocating stillness that fell over the worksite when the emptiness was discovered, a silence so unnatural that it made every sound thereafter feel louder, sharper, as though the world itself held its breath at the revelation. The discovery reignited old fears and gave birth to new legends. Some claimed the Vexleys had never been dead at all, that they had only been sleeping, waiting for a time to rise again. Others said they had been taken by the devil himself, their pact finally fulfilled in the dead of night, leaving behind empty coffins as proof of the bargain. Still others whispered that the family's bones had dissolved into the soil, merging with the cursed ground, so that the earth itself was now an extension of their presence. Each explanation was more terrifying than the last, but none provided the closure the village so desperately sought. To this day, the empty graves stand as a reminder that not all deaths lead to peace, and not all burials mark an end. The absence of the Vexleys beneath their own headstones turned their story from tragedy into an unsolvable mystery, and every person who walks past the churchyard cannot help but feel that what was uncovered in 1972 was not just the emptiness of coffins, but the presence of something darker, a void that swallowed not just their bodies, but the very certainty of death itself. Local legends suggest the Vexley family was cursed, tied to occult practices and forbidden rituals, a belief that took deep root in the years following their strange and sudden deaths. In the quiet countryside where superstition often mingled with faith, people searched for explanations that went beyond ordinary illness or tragedy. The Vexleys had always carried an air of secrecy, a distance that set them apart from the rest of the village, and this difference became fertile ground for darker interpretations of their fate. Long before their mysterious end, whispers of strange gatherings in the Vexley manor spread from servant to servant and then seeped into the streets. Candles burning at odd hours, visitors arriving cloaked and silent, and the faint echo of chanting that seemed to drift across the fields on moonless nights all became fragments of a story that no one could ever confirm but everyone believed. The belief in a curse was not without its roots in peculiar events that surrounded the family even before their deaths. Crops near the manor were said to wither for no reason. Animals born on their land often came into the world deformed, and more than one servant told of mirrors in the home that seemed to reflect faces that were not there. The villagers took these as signs, portents that something unholy lingered in the house of Vexley, and when the entire family perished under circumstances too sudden and unexplained for natural cause, the curse theory solidified into something like truth in the minds of those left behind. It was not merely death that claimed them, people said, but retribution, punishment for meddling with forces better left untouched. Stories of their involvement with forbidden rituals grew more elaborate with time. Some claimed the Vexleys practiced necromancy, using the bones of the dead in ceremonies meant to extend their lives or bind their enemies. Others swore the family had entered into a pact, offering their devotion to something dark in exchange for wealth and influence. The tall windows of their estate were said to glow faintly red on certain nights, as if fires burned within, though no smoke ever rose from the chimneys. Those who passed the manor on stormy evenings often spoke of a hum in the air, a low vibration that made the hair on their necks rise, as though the ground itself resonated with unnatural power. What gave these stories their staying power was not simply imagination, but the eerie coincidences that accompanied them. People connected the Vexleys' isolation, their prosperity, and their sudden annihilation as evidence of dealings gone wrong. The idea of forbidden rituals was not just a tale but an explanation, a way for the villagers to make sense of what otherwise seemed senseless. The discovery of their empty graves nearly a century later only reinforced this view. To many, it was undeniable proof that the family had not gone to rest as ordinary mortals should. Their pact, their curse, or their rituals had followed them into death, preventing their remains from staying in the ground. What else could explain the pristine emptiness of coffins that should have held the dust of generations? Some of the most chilling legends insist the Vexleys had sought immortality and that their empty graves were evidence of a ritual's success rather than failure. These stories suggest the family never truly died, but had slipped into another form, leaving their coffins behind as discarded shells. Others argue the opposite, that they failed in their pursuit of forbidden knowledge and were dragged bodily into some abyss, their graves left hollow because the earth itself rejected their tainted flesh. In both variations, the grave's emptiness was not a mystery, but a confirmation. Whatever the Vexleys had done in life bound them eternally to forces far beyond human comprehension. Over time, folklore shaped specific images of these rituals. Villagers described secret rooms hidden beneath the manor, chambers lined with symbols carved into the stone, altars stained dark from use, and books of strange writing that no one could decipher. Of course, none of these were ever found when the house finally collapsed into ruin, yet the absence of evidence never weakened the tales. If anything, it strengthened them, for people believed the rituals had been concealed too well, or perhaps erased by the same powers the family served. What mattered was not proof, but the collective certainty that no family could vanish so completely without some unholy bargain behind it. Even today, the idea of the Vexley curse lingers like a shadow in the village. Locals warn strangers not to speak the family's name after dark, fearing it will draw their attention. Some claim that those who visit the graveyard at night feel watched, as if the family still lingers unseen, bound to the earth not by rest, but by their own unfinished dealings. Travelers have reported dreams of faceless figures standing over their beds after walking near the Vexley plot, and others tell of hearing faint scratching beneath the soil, as though something still stirs where nothing remains. The blending of curse and ritual in the Vexley story serves as a reminder of how history and horror intertwine. What began as unexplained tragedy grew into legend, and what legend lacked in fact it made up for in the power of fear. The Vexleys became more than just a family who met a strange end. They became symbols of the dangers of seeking knowledge beyond the veil, of reaching too far into the shadows where human hands were never meant to grasp. The empty graves, rather than erasing their presence, cemented their story, turning them into eternal figures of dread whispered about by generations who never knew them but could never escape their name. Authorities could never explain how the remains of the Vexley family vanished without a trace, and this lack of explanation transformed a local curiosity into a chilling mystery that seemed to gnaw at the very fabric of reason. When officials were first called to investigate the empty coffins in 1972, they arrived expecting to uncover a case of desecration, perhaps the work of grave robbers or cultists seeking relics of the dead. Yet as they examined the graves more closely, their confidence began to erode. There were no shovel marks in the soil above, no signs of tampering with the burial ground, no displaced dirt that would suggest human interference. The coffins themselves were found intact, their lids sealed, and their structures largely preserved despite decades underground. When pried open, however, they revealed only void, as though the Vexleys had never been laid to rest there at all. This discovery left investigators scrambling for rational explanations. They first considered natural decomposition, yet even in the most extreme conditions, human remains never vanish entirely. Bones endure long after flesh has decayed, and fragments of clothing, coffin lining, or even nails used in construction are always present. Here, there was nothing. The coffins were as clean as if they had been emptied the day they were placed in the ground. Forensic experts at the time admitted they had no scientific framework to account for the phenomenon. To the villagers, this silence from authority was far more terrifying than any official explanation, for it confirmed that the mystery existed beyond the reach of science and law. The police attempted to contain the story, fearing panic or desecration of other graves. Reports were filed quietly, inquiries made discreetly, but nothing substantial emerged. It was said that those who examined the site in detail grew visibly uneasy, reluctant to speak of what they had seen. One official supposedly resigned shortly after the investigation, unable to reconcile the hollow graves with his own beliefs about life and death. Another was rumored to have suffered nightmares for weeks, dreams in which the Vexleys stood at the foot of his bed, silent and watching, their faces pale and indistinct. Whether these accounts were exaggerated or not, they circulated quickly, feeding the fear that official silence was more than incompetence, it was avoidance. Historians who later revisited the case pointed out inconsistencies in burial records. Some documents listed the Vexleys' interment as having been overseen by a priest who, curiously, left no personal account of the ceremony. Others noted the absence of details typically recorded, such as coffin construction or grave depth. These gaps raised suspicions that something had been concealed from the very beginning, either deliberately or through negligence. Yet every attempt to dig deeper into the archives seemed to meet with missing pages, lost volumes, or destroyed correspondence. To conspiracy-minded locals, this was evidence of a cover-up, a quiet effort to suppress knowledge of whatever had truly happened to the family. The failure of authorities to produce an answer opened the door for darker theories to flourish. People began to say that the officials never could explain the mystery because it was not a crime or a natural process at all, but something supernatural. The Vexleys, they argued, had never truly rested in those coffins. Their remains had been taken by the same forces that marked their lives with strangeness, leaving only the illusion of a burial behind. This belief spread quickly because it filled the void left by official silence. Where science offered no answers, folklore stepped in, and the tale of the cursed, vanished Vexleys gained new momentum. Even beyond folklore, the inability of authorities to resolve the case left scars on the village itself. Trust eroded, and people began to question whether their own loved ones would remain in the ground or vanish like the Vexleys. Families visited the cemetery in quiet dread, fearing what they might find if they dared disturb their ancestors' graves. Some stopped burying their dead in consecrated ground altogether, preferring private plots where they could keep watch over the soil. The churchyard, once a place of solemn remembrance, became a site of avoidance. Its silence grew oppressive, every stone marker a reminder of the family whose absence could not be explained. The unresolved nature of the investigation gave rise to stories that the officials themselves had been cursed by handling the case. One tale recounted how a gravedigger present during the opening of the Vexley coffins fell ill soon afterward, wasting away over months despite no clear diagnosis. Another spoke of an inspector who, while reviewing the graves, claimed to hear knocking from the earth beneath his feet, only to flee and never return. Whether these were embellishments or genuine events, they highlighted the atmosphere of fear that surrounded the unexplained void left behind. The most unsettling part of the mystery was not just the absence of remains, but the completeness of that absence. Had there been fragments, bone dust, or even scraps of fabric, the case might have been easier to rationalize. But the hollow coffin suggested something absolute, a removal so thorough it defied natural law. The villagers often repeated the chilling thought that the Vexleys had not been stolen or destroyed, but had simply risen and departed, leaving their coffins behind like empty shells. The thought that the dead could walk away, unseen and unaccounted for, was more terrifying than the idea of grave robbers or cultists, because it meant death itself no longer offered certainty. As years passed, the inability of authorities to resolve the disappearance only deepened the mystery. Each retelling became darker, each silence from officials interpreted as confirmation of the unexplainable. The empty graves remained, mute witnesses to a phenomenon beyond reason, and with every passing generation, the story took firmer root. What began as an investigation into missing remains transformed into a legend of dread, carried forward precisely because no official voice could ever put it to rest. To this day, the Vexley gravesite is considered haunted ground, avoided by locals after nightfall, and it is this reputation that has allowed their story to live on long after the family itself was wiped from existence. The cemetery itself has changed over time, with many of its stones crumbled and paths overgrown, but the section where the Vexleys were once laid to rest remains the most feared. Visitors describe a peculiar stillness that hangs in the air as they approach, a silence that is not the peaceful quiet of a resting place, but a heavy absence, as if the land itself is holding its breath. Birds refuse to perch on the trees that hang over the plot, and animals grow restless if brought too close. Even the wind seems to shift when it passes through, carrying with it an unnatural chill. Those who wander near the Vexley graves at night often claim they hear faint sounds that do not belong, whispers too soft to make out, the scrape of nails on wood, or the distant echo of a door slamming through the churchyard has none. Generations of villagers have grown up hearing the same warnings. Do not linger by the Vexley graves after sunset. Do not speak their names within the cemetery. And above all, never attempt to peer too closely into the empty plots. Many treat these warnings as superstition, yet few are bold enough to test them. The handful who have returned with stories describe feelings of being watched, a pressure behind their eyes as though unseen figures stood in the periphery of their vision. Some report sudden nausea, dizziness, or headaches that vanish the moment they step away from the site. Others claim to have seen pale shapes drifting between the stones, flickering in and out of view like candlelight in a storm. These accounts differ in detail but share a common theme. No one who enters that ground at night leaves untouched by the experience. The cemetery's reputation has made it a site of fascination for outsiders, particularly those drawn to the occult or the paranormal. In the decades since the discovery of the empty graves, researchers, spiritualists, and thrill-seekers have come to the village seeking answers. Some bring cameras and equipment, hoping to capture proof of spectral activity, while others come armed with talismans and protective charms, convinced that the Vexley's curse lingers over the soil. Few leave with anything more than unsettling stories, but those stories are enough to feed the legend. There are accounts of equipment malfunctioning near the graves, batteries draining instantly, or recordings capturing voices that were not present. A few investigators spoke of dreams that plagued them for weeks afterward, visions of corridors stretching endlessly into darkness, or of figures standing at their bedsides, silent and staring. For the villagers themselves, the presence of outsiders has only deepened their unease. They watch strangers enter the cemetery with a mix of pity and dread, certain that nothing good can come of disturbing what should remain untouched. Some whisper that every outsider who meddles with the Vexley site leaves behind a piece of themselves, absorbed by the restless ground, and that this is why the graves remain empty. The Vexleys are still feeding, still taking, still binding others to their fate. It is said that a few researchers who came in the 70s and 80s vanished without explanation, their names never appearing in official records but remembered by locals who saw them arrive and never depart. Whether these are true disappearances or fabrications born from fear hardly matters, because the effect is the same. The Vexley plot has become a place of dread, not only for those who live near it, but for anyone who hears the story. Legends have grown to fill the void left by the unanswered questions. Some believe the Vexleys rise from their graves on certain nights, walking the cemetery grounds in silence before vanishing into the mist at dawn. Others say their souls are bound to the earth itself, unable to move on, their voices carried on the wind to any who dare listen. A more chilling belief holds that the family does not haunt the ground in spirit at all, but in body, that their disappearance from the coffins was not the end but the beginning of a transformation, and that they still walk the earth unseen but present, cursed to wander forever. Those who subscribe to this view claim the cemetery's unease is not the result of lingering spirits, but of the unnatural void left behind, a space where death itself was violated. Every attempt to consecrate the site or cleanse it through ritual has failed. Priests have blessed the ground, salt has been scattered in circles, and holy water poured over the graves, yet nothing has diminished the sense of wrongness that clings to the plot. If anything, these efforts only seem to aggravate the air, leaving those present with a deeper conviction that the Vexleys cannot be banished by ordinary means. Some believe the family's pact or curse was too powerful to be undone, binding them eternally to the soil. Others argue that their remains are not there to sanctify, that the graves are simply markers of absence, monuments not to death, but to disappearance. What is most unnerving is that the graves themselves continue to decay in unnatural ways. While other stones weather slowly with time, the Vexley markers seem to crumble faster, inscriptions fading as though deliberately erased. The earth around them often appears disturbed even when no one has entered the cemetery, the grass thin and brittle, the soil cracked despite rains that leave the rest of the ground lush. Those who believe in curses say this is the land rejecting what was placed upon it, a visible sign of the Vexley's lingering presence. Others interpret it as proof that the family continues to exert influence, their absence actively reshaping the place where they should have lain. Today, the cemetery remains a place that few visit willingly, a patch of ground woven into the folklore of the village and the fear of its people. Travelers passing through often feel compelled to seek it out, drawn by curiosity and the weight of the story, but the villagers rarely accompany them. They know too well what it means to walk near the Vexley plot, to feel that unnatural stillness settle into their bones. For them, the graves are not merely empty, they are reminders of a family whose death defied explanation, whose curse endured beyond the grave, and whose story continues to haunt not only the land, but the imagination of all who dare speak their name.